I've always believed that grief speaks the loudest in silence. Not in the screams, not in the sobbing, but in the space left behind. The empty chair, the untouched coffee mug, the phone that doesn't ring back. My name is Elena Moore, and this is the story of how I lost my husband, my son, and the illusion of family, only to find something far more lasting. My voice, my peace, and my legacy. It all began on a quiet Tuesday morning. My husband, Thomas, was sitting at the kitchen table, halfway through one of his usual grumbles about the powdered creamer I kept buying by mistake. He was smiling, joking. "If I drop dead from this powdered nonsense," he said, tapping his spoon on the rim of his mug, "you'll finally know real guilt." I laughed, rolled my eyes, reached for the butter knife. Then everything stopped, his hand twitched, the spoon slipped. His eyes widened, and for one terrifying second, I thought he was just playing another one of his dark jokes. But it wasn't a joke. He didn't say another word, he didn't even blink. I called 911 while on my knees, shaking, screaming his name. The operator's voice was steady, calm, but mine broke into 1,000 pieces. I did the chest compressions. I whispered, begged, pleaded, but I knew. I knew the moment his hand went cold in mine. Thomas was gone. We'd been married 42 years. I had never imagined a world without him. Even in the quiet moments, the ones where you daydream about rocking chairs and grandchildren and rainy days, I never once pictured myself alone in that kitchen. And yet there I was. I remember sitting on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor while the paramedics packed up equipment and whispered words like massive, non-recoverable, and DNR. I nodded. I don't remember blinking. I don't even remember crying. Just the pressure building inside my chest, the kind that doesn't find a way out, not yet. After they left, I sat next to the chair Thomas had just been in, his coffee still steaming, his crossword puzzle halfway finished. I held his hand for what felt like an hour. Maybe it was longer. Eventually, I picked up my phone. I called my only child, Liam. It rang 5 times. When he picked up, I was still shaking. But I managed the words. "Liam, your father, he just collapsed. He's gone." There was a pause, then he spoke. "Mom, today's Rachel's birthday. Can we talk later?" Just like that, not a gasp, not a "where are you?" Not a single question, just a polite request to delay grief, because it was Rachel's birthday. They had brunch plans, people were already over, and I said nothing. I hung up before he could speak again, before he could say anything else that would slice deeper into a wound that hadn't even begun to bleed properly. I sat in the stillness of that kitchen and stared at the chair Thomas would never sit in again. The next few days moved like fog, the kind that doesn't lift, just shifts slightly when you move. When I called the night before the funeral to confirm the service time, Rachel answered the phone. Not Liam. She spoke brightly, like she was rehearsing a polite excuse. "Liam's still thinking about it," she said. "We already booked the cabin weekend, and the cancellation fees are kind of steep this close to the date." I remember blinking, waiting for the punchline. It never came. And so the whispers began long before the service. Where's Liam? Is everything okay with Rachel? Even Thomas's old friend Frank leaned over during the eulogy and asked, I thought your boy would be front row today. I nodded, like it wasn't killing me. After the service, in the quiet of the fellowship hall, a co-worker of Thomas approached me. His name was Brian. I didn't know him well, but what he said changed everything. I know it's not my place, he said gently, but I thought you should know Thomas was worried. About Liam, about the money, about how Rachel was pushing him. I froze. What money? Brian didn't elaborate. He looked uncomfortable. He handed me a card and walked away. That night, back at home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in Thomas's chair. I stared at the fireplace and wondered what I'd missed. Then I opened Instagram. The first post that popped up was Rachel, smiling, holding a mimosa, wearing a bright pink dress. Caption, best birthday ever, love my hubby. There were balloons in the background, gifts stacked on the counter. The photo was posted the same day I buried my husband. My grief twisted into something darker, sharper. The next morning I woke up with a mission, not revenge, not anger, clarity. I went straight to Thomas's filing cabinet, the one he always kept locked. I knew where the spare key was, taped behind a photo from our wedding day. I opened it. Inside were folders, neatly labeled, meticulously kept. And what I found made my blood run cold. Transfers, 15 of them, all to Liam's account, 2,000 here, 3,000 there, and one for $12,000. Labeled, Urgent Rachel Medical. Thomas never told me. He never hid things from me. We promised no secrets. Not after we merged our bank accounts. Not after we lost our first baby and held each other in the dark. And yet, he had been hiding this. But the final blow came in the form of a letter. Folded, unsigned, but in his handwriting. Addressed to Liam, it read, I love you, but I can't let you take advantage of your mother's trust. If you continue down this road, I'll have no choice but to cut you off completely. He never sent it. It was dated 2 weeks before he died. I held that letter like it might disintegrate in my hands. The weight of 42 years pressed down on my chest. Liam hadn't just abandoned me. He had ignored his father's last warning, and he had chosen convenience over legacy. That was the night I decided not to fight, but to act, quietly and permanently. I spent the next morning in silence, not mourning silence, decision silence. The kind that follows when grief stops begging for comfort and begins searching for answers. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where Thomas died 5 days earlier, and stared at his unwashed coffee mug in the sink. I hadn't moved it, couldn't. I stared at that mug like it still held warmth. Like if I reached for it, I might find him again. But all I found was cold ceramic and a clearer sense of purpose. I didn't call Liam. I didn't send a single message. Instead, I made an appointment with Alan Klein, our family lawyer and the only person who ever remembered both our birthdays without a calendar prompt. When I walked into his office that Thursday morning, he took one look at my face and didn't ask about probate or funeral costs. He simply said, "This is about more than estate planning, isn't it?" I nodded. Then I placed a stack of papers in front of him, bank transfers, the unsent letter, and a handwritten note I'd spent all night composing. It read simply, "Everything goes into a trust. Every account, every asset, the house, the annuity, Thomas's stocks, but not for Liam, not for Rachel, not a cent." Alan didn't blink. He opened a legal pad and started writing. "Do you want to include a clause for future reconsideration?" he asked gently. "No," I said. "This isn't punishment, it's preservation. When your child chooses manipulation over mourning, you stop worrying about appearances. You stop hoping they'll change. You protect what's left." We structured everything meticulously. A living trust. A sealed letter to be given to my granddaughter Claire, Liam's daughter, on her 18th birthday. And included, at Alan's suggestion, a transcript of the visit Liam had made to my house just days after Thomas died. He'd arrived alone. Rachel waited in the car, engine running like she expected him to fail. When I opened the door, he said, "Mom," with a hesitant smile. I stepped aside. No words. Inside, the house hadn't changed. Gerald's chair still stood in the corner untouched. A quiet monument to everything Liam had missed. I offered him coffee. He declined. He sat on the edge of the couch like he was waiting for a commercial break, eyes darting to the fireplace, to the floor, anywhere but me. Then I asked, "Did you know your father tried to call you the night before he died?" He flinched. "Barely, but I saw it." "My phone was on silent," he said. "We were out for dinner. Rachel had this whole surprise thing." He stopped, realized how ridiculous he sounded, looked down again. "He wasn't sick," I said. "He had a heart attack at the breakfast table, 5 minutes after making a joke." Liam rubbed his temples. "I didn't know, Mom." And that's when I dropped the next match. I found the transfers. His entire body stiffened. "What transfers?" he asked too quickly. I didn't respond. I pulled out the letter, the one from Thomas, still folded. I handed it to him. He scanned it. Quiet. Then folded it and set it on the coffee table like it was a receipt for something mundane. He didn't mean that. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't speaking to the boy who used to fall asleep on his father's shoulder during football games. I wasn't talking to the teenager who helped build a shed in our backyard. I was speaking to a man who had learned how to rationalize betrayal, and I felt nothing but clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern, and I was done participating. When Liam left, Rachel smirked from the driver's seat like she had won something. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. No coffee, no morning news, just calm, focused. I called Alan. I told him to initiate everything. That week, I drafted the letter to Claire, 6 pages, not of bitterness but of truth. I told her who her grandfather really was, what he'd done for her father, and how that kindness had been turned into leverage and lies. I told her that the money she would receive one day wasn't a gift. It was a responsibility, a reminder to choose love over convenience, loyalty over optics, and courage over silence. When the paperwork was finalized, Alan sent the certified letter to Liam. It was delivered at 11:13 a.m. on a Wednesday. I know because I stared at the confirmation email for 5 full minutes before closing my laptop and making tea. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't respond. But Rachel did, not with words, with a string of text messages, each more unhinged than the last. You're ruining everything, you're confused. Claire deserves better than this. You'll regret this. I didn't reply, not because I didn't have words, but because the silence was stronger than anything I could say. 3 days later, Liam finally texted, "Mom, I just got the letter." I already knew that, but I said nothing. Another message came, "Is this real?" And finally I responded, "You tell me." There was a long pause. Then, I didn't know Dad felt that way. I didn't snap, I didn't scream, I said, "Then you never really knew your father at all." Rachel called the next day. Her voice was syrupy sweet, weaponized sweetness. "I just think there's been a lot of emotion. We should all sit down like adults." I hung up before she finished, because that was the boundary. You don't choose absence over mourning and expect presence in the will. You don't skip the funeral and then ask to control the legacy. Not here, not anymore. They arrived unannounced. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, like a storm that doesn't bother to knock. Rachel stepped out of their car first, heels clicking too loudly for a driveway, sunglasses still on. She looked prepared, not for a conversation, but for a confrontation. Liam trailed behind her slower, his hands in his pockets, shoulders stiff. Like a man who wasn't sure whether he was there to support her or to contain her. When I opened the front door, Rachel didn't greet me. She didn't ask how I was. She led with an accusation. "You're manipulating this entire family, Elena." Her words echoed through the hallway. Sharp, practiced, I said nothing, just stepped aside and let them in. Not because I wanted to, but because someone else needed to hear what was about to happen. Claire, she was upstairs, 12 years old but sharp, quiet in the way that meant observant. I knew she was listening, half crouched in the hallway out of view, and some part of me, some deeper instinct wanted her to hear this. Not to hurt her, but to protect her, to give her truth as armor. Rachel stormed into the living room like it was still hers, like the couch and the memories belonged to her now. Her perfume was overwhelming, her presence even more so. Liam followed, slower. He sat down on the edge of the sofa like he wasn't sure if he should be there. Rachel kept talking. "You blindsided us. You're poisoning Claire against her father. You know how damaging that is." I turned to Liam. "Do you agree with her?" I asked. He looked away, didn't answer, just swallowed. And that silence, it said everything. He wouldn't stop her. He wouldn't defend me. He wouldn't defend his own father's memory. From upstairs, I heard a quiet creak. Claire, shifting her weight. I didn't stop her from listening. She needed to hear this. Because one day, when the story was told differently, when Rachel cried victim to friends or tried to frame me as the bitter grandmother, Claire would remember the truth. Not the performance. Rachel kept circling, throwing words like darts. But then Claire appeared. She came down the stairs slowly. Eyes wide but calm, she didn't say a word. She just looked at her father, then at Rachel, then at me, and turned around and walked back upstairs. And that moment, that simple, silent walk, it unraveled Rachel more than anything I could have said. "She doesn't understand," Rachel shouted. "She understands more than you think," I replied. Then I walked to the front door, opened it wide, and said, "We're done here." They didn't argue, not this time. Rachel muttered something under her breath. Liam looked like he wanted to say something, anything, but the words never came. They left. I closed the door, locked it. Then I went into my study to breathe. That's when Claire knocked gently. She held something in her hand, a USB drive. She placed it on my desk. "I didn't know what to do with it before," she said softly. "But now I think maybe you should have it." I blinked. "What is it?" "I recorded some stuff," she said. "A while ago, just in case. I didn't mean to spy. I just—" Her voice trailed off, but I understood. She hadn't meant to betray anyone. She meant to protect someone. Me. That night I plugged the drive into my laptop, and I sat in silence. The folders were labeled by date. Inside were recordings, screenshots, videos, phone conversations, whispered threats, strategy sessions. And the worst, video footage from the kitchen, filmed from behind a hallway corner. Rachel whispering into her phone, "If we push just a little harder, she'll crack. We'll say she's confused. Maybe even get the lawyer to question her judgment." State-appointed oversight isn't hard to get. My blood ran cold. In another recording, Liam's voice, tired and mechanical, "She's not going to last forever. We're kind of counting on the money now anyway. And if Claire plays nice, she can still help us later." I closed my eyes and I cried, not because of what they said, but because of who had captured it. Claire, 12 years old, alone in a house where truth had been treated like poison. And still, she had the courage to collect it, to save it, to give it to me. I backed the drive up, twice. One copy to Alan, one in my safe. Then I sat in my chair and stared at the USB drive in my palm. It felt like a grenade, but also like a gift, because now I knew. This story wasn't just about what I'd lost. It was about what I still had left to protect, and who I had to protect it for. The mediation was scheduled for the following Thursday. A neutral space downtown, beige walls, polite chairs, bottled water. The kind of place designed to look harmless, while everything inside was bracing for war. I didn't wear black, I wore deep blue, calm, certain, storm-like in its restraint. Alan arrived early. He set the folder on the glass table, then looked at me and said, "Whatever happens in there, remember you're not the one who failed." I nodded. I didn't need a speech. I needed the truth to do the talking. 10 minutes later, Liam and Rachel arrived. Rachel first, of course, wearing a muted designer suit. Hair curled to perfection. Expression poised, controlled, like she had practiced the mirror version of grief. Liam looked more worn than ever, eyes down, shoulders slouched, a man fading into the shadow of someone else's script. Rachel started before we sat down. "Elena has been acting emotionally unstable since Thomas's passing," she said. This entire trust situation is a retaliation. The mediator held up a hand. Let's begin in order. Introductions, process, protocol. Then it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I just reached into the folder Alan had placed beside me, pulled out the USB drive, and slid it across the table. This, I said, is why. The mediator took it, opened the laptop, and pressed play. Rachel's voice filled the room, low and cold. If we push just a little harder, she'll crack. Liam's voice followed. She's not going to last forever. The room changed temperature. Rachel tried to interrupt. She's 12, she doesn't understand context. The mediator didn't look at her, he looked at Liam. Would you like to respond? Liam said nothing, just rubbed his hands together, as if trying to erase fingerprints from his own betrayal. And I said softly, she tried to warn you. Rachel exploded then, not with argument, but with rage, unfiltered, raw. She slammed her hand on the table, shouted something about slander, about manipulation, about me weaponizing a child. But I didn't flinch, because it was all right there, every word, every whisper, every plan, not vengeance, just truth, told clearly. Rachel stormed out of the room. The mediator turned to Alan and said, "There is no legal basis to challenge the trust. It's sound, it's protective, and it's backed by direct evidence of undue influence." Liam didn't speak, not a word, until the end. When everyone else had left the room, he stayed seated, head down. "I just wanted peace," he said quietly, and I replied, "You don't get peace from silence. You get it from standing up when it matters." He didn't look at me, just nodded slowly. Like a man who understood it was already too late. That night, back home, I lit a single candle in the kitchen. Thomas's mug was still on the shelf. I didn't need to wash it. Its silence said everything now. And then, just after noon the next day, there was a knock on my front door, not from Liam, not from Rachel, from Claire. She stepped inside holding something, an envelope. Thick, unopened, the one I had written her 5 years ago. "I never read it," she said, "because I wanted to read it with you." We sat in the living room. She opened it carefully like it was sacred. 6 pages. My voice poured out at a time when everything felt like it was collapsing. She read silently, her fingers trembling slightly. Then she looked up, eyes bright but brimming. "I want to change my middle name," she said, "to Coraline. After your mother." I didn't cry, I wept, but not from sadness, from restoration. Because in that moment I realized something. I hadn't just protected the legacy Thomas left behind. I had passed something forward, something Claire could carry. Not just a name, but a truth no one could twist again. Later that evening, we went to her graduation. They called her name Claire Coraline Moore. She crossed the stage and smiled right at me, not at the cameras, not at the crowd. At me. Afterward, when the ceremony ended, she ran into my arms and whispered, "My roommate dropped out for next semester. I told them I want to live with you." I laughed through the tears, through the healing, through the quiet victory that Rachel would never understand. We never mentioned her that day, not once. She had faded, not by force, but by her own choices. And for the first time in years, I believed in the future again. The days after Claire moved in felt like spring after a long frost. Not everything bloomed at once, but the light returned. She brought laughter back into the walls, music, socks left in the hallway, stories about classmates and assignments and the absurdity of high school politics. And she brought presents, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that fills a space simply by being genuine. We cooked dinner together. We stayed up too late watching classic films. She asked me questions about Thomas, real ones. Wanted to know what made him laugh, what books he loved, what mistakes he made and owned. "I just want to know who he really was," she said once, "not what they told me." And so I told her everything. The corny jokes, the stubborn pride, the way he once cried after we lost our dog and tried to pretend it was just dust in his eye. Claire listened like memory was sacred. And maybe that's what legacy truly is, not assets or heirlooms, but stories held in the hands of those willing to carry them forward honestly. One afternoon, I received a letter from Alan. The trust had officially been finalized, filed, sealed, and stamped with no room for contest. Everything now belonged to Claire through the family endowment we had structured with care. There would be no fallback clause, no in case they apologize loophole, and most importantly, no access granted to Liam or Rachel under any circumstance. Later that week, I received another message, this time from Alan's assistant. Rachel's attorney has withdrawn. No further legal filings expected. It appears they are letting go. Letting go, strange phrase, I thought, because people like Rachel don't let go. They just find someone new to manipulate. But this time it wouldn't be Claire. Not anymore. A few days later, as we were cleaning the attic, Claire found a box of old letters, correspondence between Thomas and his mother during his first year of college. She read them aloud that evening. His handwriting messy, his sentences long, earnest, full of fire. "I didn't know Grandpa was so open," she said, half laughing. "Neither did he," I smiled. Not until someone made space for it. That night, she placed the letters in a new box, one she labeled in black marker, for when I need reminding. And I realized, in all the chaos that had tried to steal this family's future, something remarkable had survived. Honesty, quiet, steady, fierce. A few weeks later, we visited Thomas's grave, just the two of us. Claire brought a yellow lily. I brought silence. And then, just as we were about to leave, she said, "Can I tell him something?" I nodded. She knelt down and whispered, "Don't worry, I see it now, and I'll never forget." That night she surprised me again, a handmade envelope. Inside was a card with only 3 words. "You chose right." No one else would have understood the weight of that phrase. But I did, because for a long time I had questioned everything. Had I gone too far? Had I been too cold, too final? But standing there, holding that card, I finally let go of the doubt, the ache, the guilt that doesn't belong to the person who stands their ground, but still tries to make peace. And I chose rest, real rest, not just sleep but surrender, to the quiet I had earned, the legacy I had clarified, And the granddaughter I had never expected to become the bravest voice of us all. On Claire's next birthday, I gave her something small, a wooden box. Inside, a single envelope, a new letter, labeled, "For your 30th." She smiled, teared up, and didn't ask what it said. She just hugged me, hard, and whispered, "You really do write the best letters." Weeks passed, then months. The house no longer felt haunted by betrayal. It felt full of life, of books, of the future. I started volunteering at the local literacy center, helping women write their own letters, teaching them how to tell their stories not for court or confrontation, but for closure. And when I spoke about Thomas, I did so without bitterness, because he had tried. He had warned Liam. He had left a letter, even if he hadn't sent it. And in the end, I did, for both of us. One morning, as we were making tea, Claire asked, "Do you think people like them ever change?" I didn't answer right away. I handed her a cup, then said, "Chain. Maybe, but some people don't want to be better. They want to be right. And when that doesn't work, they rewrite." She nodded, "But we wrote ours first," she said quietly. And I realized she had already learned the lesson, the final, hardest one, that no one gets to tell your story for you, not if you speak first and speak clearly. Epilogue. A year later, Claire left for university. But not far. She still came home every Sunday. We still made pasta. We still laughed about nothing. Her toothbrush still lived in the upstairs bathroom, and when the time came to transfer the trust into her name fully, she did one thing that made my heart swell. She added a clause that a portion of it, just a portion, would be used to create scholarships for young women who had protected their elders, who had spoken truth in families where silence had been survival. She named it the Coraline Fund, and beneath the signature line she added a quote, "She tried to warn you." I wept not because of what we lost, but because of what we saved. And in that moment I knew there would be no revisions to this legacy, no loopholes, no silence that could erase it, because this family had chosen its future. And the letter, the one that Thomas never sent, had become the beginning of something none of them could rewrite.